Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. So I'm going to have all of you guys on mute for now, and I'm going to give everyone just a minute here. It's just now 1, and then I'm going to give some instructions on how we're going to do this, introduce Rebecca, and then we'll get started in just a minute. So I hope everyone's doing well and surviving this time of isolation and
Stupidity.
being on their own. We're even going to do door prizes. Let me see how many we have in here. We have 26 of our 40, so we're getting there. Oh, and I'll go ahead and tell everyone, if you'll click on the chat button at the bottom, and if you have questions, if you'll post them in the chat box, and then I will kind of monitor those. And then when we get to the end, we'll be able to answer those questions. So if you can't hear me very well, make sure that your volume is up on your computer. And if you are hearing me okay, give me a thumbs up so that I can kind of get a poll. Good, yay, that's great. Okay, so what we're going to start with, this is our first ever CASA Lunch and Learn via Zoom, and I'm really excited. And I'm really thankful that Rebecca, it's Rebecca McQueen to me, but she's Rebecca Haught now, and that she so graciously agreed to come and address us and speak to us today about advocating for mental health and psychological health for our children, and that she's our guinea pig today. So we're going to be sharing a screen, you're going to be watching a video, and we're going to start off with a quick poll. So I'm going to launch a poll. For those of you that are on a computer, you should be able to see it pop up. If you're on by phone, you may not be able to see it. And I'm going to give you guys a minute to tell me how you're handling this COVID crisis. So if it's not popped up, you might have to kind of look around your screen. There we go. Aha. One person's eating way too much. And what I love about these polls is that it gives you an indication of how many people are responding. So we're about 50% right now, and we're getting up there pretty quickly. So I'll give everyone a minute to finish. We're at 60%. And we're at 75%. We're almost at 100%. So it seems like the majority of the people are either working in their yard or eating way too much. And 3 of us have discovered that our children really are animals. They're not too agreeable and too easy to get along with sometimes. And nobody, let me see here. Oh, a few of you have discovered the coronavirus coffee. And that's a good way to get through this time too. So, all right, I'm going to end that poll. And what we're going to do is, let me minimize that. I'm going to introduce Rebecca McQueen and then, or Haught. Sorry, Rebecca, that's such a bad habit that I can't break. I mean, I've only known her basically since she was 5 years old. So that's the way I've known her whole life. So I'm going to introduce her, then we're going to take a poll. But Rebecca graduated from Wiley High School. She got her undergraduate at ACU, correct, Rebecca? Oh, let me unmute you.
Yes, that's correct.
And if you tell us where you got your master's.
Yes, so I went to ACU and got my degree in psychology, and then I went to Haught & Simmons and I got my master's in clinical counseling and marriage and family therapy at Haught & Simmons.
And then she's registered in play therapy, and she's going to talk to you a lot about that. A lot of people can do play therapy, but not all are registered to do it. And so she's going to talk to us about that a little bit. But Rebecca is one of the kindest, most genuine people that I know. I love her dearly. She's one of my daughter's best friends. And I was mama too growing up. So I feel like she is my own child. And I'm just so proud of her and what she's doing for children in our community. And she just has so much to offer. And so I wanted to do one more quick poll. And this one is about how, I'm going to do this one first. This is about your confidence in advocating for mental health and the psychological well-being of our children. How confident you feel in advocating for those things. So if you'll look these options over and then kind of cast your vote, we want to get a feel for where you guys are. Whoops. Somehow I got logged in from another device. Can y'all still see the poll? Angela, if you by any chance logged in as me, you're going to have to log out. So Rebecca, is the poll coming up still, or is it gone?
It's gone now that I submitted mine, and it's gone.
Okay, so I don't know that I won't get to see my poll. Okay,
You
sorry
will.
about that.
You will.
Hello?
Can you hear me? It just has your name on there for some reason. I'm logged in as me.
Oh, it ended the poll. It said I was logged in on another device.
Oh, no. Okay. I don't know what to do.
Oh, now she's herself.
Well, I just
Well,
changed
did you
the
log
name.
in with your email or my email?
Mine.
Oh, I don't know. That's weird. Okay. Well, we'll just have to do without the poll, guys. I'm sorry. But basically, I'm just wanting to know where you are on your confidence level. If you want to type it in the chat and just say, I'm confident, not confident, whatever you want to do. And that way we'll kind of get a good idea of where you are on that. But what we're going to do is just go ahead and jump into the training then. And I'm going to share the screen and allow Rebecca to take control of the screen. And I'm going to be monitoring questions. So as you go through, please don't interrupt, but put your questions in the chat box and I'll be monitoring that. And then Rebecca can look at those and we'll talk about and answer all those questions at the end. So I'm looking forward to it. Rebecca, the screen is yours.
All right. Awesome. Well, let me pull up my PowerPoint and then we'll kind of go from here. Awesome. Well, I hope everybody can hear me okay. So I'll kind of be going through this presentation. We're mostly going to be touching on play therapy, which is the preferred form of treatment for children whenever they're seeking counseling and dealing with any of the various issues that they might be dealing with. So it's probably my understanding that most of you know about play therapy. It is what it sounds like. It's therapy through the mode of play. But hopefully we'll be able to kind of give you a better idea of what exactly it is, how it's beneficial, why it's beneficial, and what your role can be as a CASA advocate in that process. So first I'll start off with a little bit about me. I always enjoy knowing a little bit about the presenter if I don't know them so that I can feel a little bit more connected. So like Rebel said, my name is Rebecca Haught. My maiden name was Rebecca McQueen. I am a licensed professional counselor and a registered play therapist. So this is my husband, Hunter, and then we have a 1-year-old son. So right now I practice at Freedom Counseling and I'm there 2 days a week. And then otherwise I'm at home, stay-at-home mom role with our little guy. I like to think I have the best of both worlds and I can kind of get the best of both sides. So to kind of move on, I'll first share a little bit about how I was introduced to play therapy. So whenever I was introduced to the world of play therapy was back whenever I was 15 years old. So my family began the journey of foster to adoption, and Miss Zoe here in the picture, she came to be a part of our family. I think most of you have heard from Zoe in your journey to becoming a CASA. So Zoe shares at many of the trainings kind of what her experience was, and she had a CASA worker, Granny Janet, while she was in the foster care system. So she was in foster care from the ages of 4 to 8, and her CASA was key in helping her get the help that she needed, but also the placements that she needed too. So when Zoe came to live with our family and be a part of our family, along came all of the various forms of therapy that were also needed. And part of that was play therapy. So I had gone with them to an appointment and kind of expressed interest in what play therapy was. And her therapist, Jennifer Smotherman, got permission for me to be a part of the session. So I got to go in, be a part of it, and I was amazed that like this was a job. And that I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I was one of those rare students that decided in high school what I wanted to do, went into college with that idea, and finished through grad school all with the same goal in mind. So I've wanted to do this for about 10 years, and it's pretty fun now that I'm like actually getting to do what I had kind of set out to do, because it is a little bit of a long process through school, graduate school, and then all of your hours to get your licensure after that. So I'm excited y'all are here, and that I'll get to kind of share some of the things I'm passionate about. My hopes are that you'll have a better understanding of what play therapy is, why it's beneficial, and then also kind of your role in advocating for that. So I'm going to start off with this cute little clip that does a good job of kind of giving us a framework for play therapy. So I think it's pulling up. Maybe. Okay. I think it's coming.
How was school today?
Uh-oh. There we go.
Well, it was a very frustrating day. Mommy was teasing me about my haircut, and that was embarrassing.
Yes, it is for me. Is it not for anyone else?
I became angry. I'm ashamed to admit it, dear mother.
Can anybody
but I
else see
could
it?
not resist striking
It should be. Is it still a share screen?
Well, this happened.
Do I have to share it?
Yes. It should
It
automatically.
says stop share.
Okay, just
New
keep
share? Let me try this. Ooh, I think I might have figured it out. Can you see that now? Okay, sorry.
How was school today? Well, it was a very frustrating day. Tommy was teasing me about my haircut, and that was embarrassing. As a way of coping with my embarrassment, I became angry. I'm ashamed to admit it, dear mother, but I could not resist striking Tommy with my fist. While this act of emotional release did offer a moment's respite from my embarrassment, the distress was short-lived. The next thing I knew, Tommy had immobilized me with a headlock and gave me what is referred to colloquially as a swirl.
This isn't how kids communicate, but they do communicate in other ways. Play is a child's first language. When a child plays, they express thoughts and feelings that would otherwise remain hidden. That's why play therapy can be a powerful tool for addressing a child's cognitive, behavioral, and emotional challenges. Licensed mental health practitioners use play therapy to help children process their experiences and develop more effective strategies for managing their world. To learn more about play therapy and registered play therapists, visit a4pt.org.
Oh. I really just need a chocolate milk on the rocks and a long soak in the tub.
Okay. Go back. Okay, so that, oh no.
Is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject.
Sorry, it's playing in the background. Here we go. Well, Okay. Is the slide pulled up, Rebel, for y'all? Okay. Sorry, I can't tell what's on my screen and what's on your screen. Okay, so that kind of gives a general idea of what play therapy is, gives us a little bit of a framework to work off of. So according to the Association for Play Therapy, which is the big organization that really advocates for it, play therapy is the systematic use of a theoretical model to establish an interpersonal process wherein trained play therapists use the therapeutic powers of play to help clients prevent or resolve the psychosocial difficulties that they may be experiencing in achieving optimal growth and development. So basically, play therapy is a process that meets kids where they're at developmentally. It helps children build coping skills. It helps enhance their ability to self-regulate and promote their positive self-esteem. So more simply put, play therapy is a way to be with a child in a level that honors where that child is at developmentally and looks for ways of helping in the language of the child. So like that video said, play is everybody's first language. So in the method of play therapy, toys are their words and play is their language. Now that doesn't mean we don't ever use words. We do use words in play therapy. It just means that words don't necessarily have to be present in order for the treatment to still be effective, which makes us pretty unique compared to other cognitive types of therapy, or even just a traditional talk therapy that many counselors offer. So with that, licensed mental health professionals therapeutically use play to help their clients to better express themselves and resolve their problems. So really young children especially rely on play to express their emotional world and what's going on within them. So children will explore their feelings through the use of symbolic play. So they'll use symbols to represent some of the other things that are going on in their life. And this is especially important whenever it comes to processing trauma. So we'll touch on that a little bit more here in a minute. But basically, what I would tell you, if you were going to be looking for play therapy for a child, I would tell them that just like as an adult, if you were to come to a counseling office ready to process some of the experiences or some of the things that you dealt with or going on with you internally, as you would tell me those with your words, as a counselor, I would help kind of guide you along that process through the responses that I give, through the questions that I ask, that sort of thing. So it's the same way with a child. They're going to come into the playroom ready to play, ready to share their story, ready to share the experiences that they're having internally. And through my responses to their play, I'm going to be able to help kind of guide them through that process. So play therapy is typically geared for children ages 3 to 12. However, I want to pause there because it's really important to remember that this would need to be the emotional or the developmental age of the child. So we know that oftentimes with trauma, kids' developmental or emotional age is often half of what their chronological age is. It's kind of a good rule of thumb. It's not that way for every kid, but that's sometimes a good rule of thumb to go by, which is often why you'll see a 9-year-old throwing fits like a 4 or a 5-year-old, or you'll see a 16-year-old that only has the reasoning skills of an 8-year-old because their developmental or their emotional age is lagging because their brain wasn't able to continue developing while they were experiencing that traumatic experience. So what is play therapy helpful for? The short answer is basically anything a child is experiencing. So both behavioral problems and behavioral disorders. So those behavioral problems include divorce, anger management, grief, loss, abandonment, bullying, crisis, trauma, difficulty at school with peers, you name it. If the child is processing that experience, play therapy is likely going to be helpful for them. Different behavioral disorders that it's proven to be helpful for are listed there. These include anxiety, depression, ADHD, autism, developmental delay, physical and learning disabilities, oppositional defiant disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, reactive attachment disorder, all of these different types of diagnosis that many of your kids would get on those psychological evaluations that they have to be tested for. So I wanted to touch a little bit more on how play therapy is most beneficial for treatment for trauma. So actually just yesterday, this article that I think Rebel sent to y'all in the chat, it was just sent out by the board of directors from the Association for Play Therapy, and it does a really good job of really consolidating why play therapy is so beneficial for kids who have experienced trauma. It was actually a rebuttal to an article that was in Psychology Today last week that had a whole bunch of registered play therapists up in arms. But there's bukus of research that show why play therapy is really, it's an effective form of treatment for kids who have experienced trauma. So I wanted to kind of touch on this just to help give you a general idea of how it's beneficial. So what we know is that traumatic experiences are primarily stored within the sensory networks of the brain and the body, often resulting in this profound dysregulation. And you've likely seen this. This is really, dysregulation means misbehavior in a lot of ways. So traumatic events are often not saved as verbal memory, resulting in a lack of narrative memory and rational thought about the experience. So often kids aren't able to give a chronological order of events or things that have happened throughout their life, because that's not where trauma is stored in the brain. It's a lot more jumbled than that, and it's often stored, like I said, in the sensory networks. And we'll go back to this several times, but that's really important to remember, is that it affects the sensory networks. So because of this, play therapy does not rely on language or cognitive awareness to initiate treatment. And therefore, the somatosensory experiences that so much of play incorporates are really used as the building blocks, the foundation for regulation, creativity, abstract thought processes, prosocial behavior, and expressive language. So it really kind of helps set the foundation for what's needed in therapy in order to be able to build upon that as they continue on. So through the experience of rhythmic pattern, repetitive input that children experience during play, children become emotionally engaged and better regulated with that. So continuing on with that, with that being said, I was also going to touch on the cognitive behavioral side of things. So cognitive behavioral therapy and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy do really well in addressing the cognitive issues that somebody might experience during or after trauma, such as guilt, shame, grief, their maladaptive perspectives of their traumatic experiences, and how that practically plays out is a child thinking that maybe something that happened was their fault, or that they could have prevented somebody from doing this. You know, like, well, if I just would have gotten better grades, my parents wouldn't have been arguing, and then they wouldn't have gotten divorced. That's the sort of way that we see this play out, those maladaptive perspectives of their traumatic experiences. So it's important to remember that cognitive types of therapy, so cognitive behavioral therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, are really dependent on strong cortical modulation of those experiences. And in order to have that strong cortical modulation, those primary networks of the brain have to be in place. So the way that I like to structure my therapy sessions is what I tell a kid or a teenager coming into my office is the first part of our session, I choose what we do. And then the second part of the session, they get to choose what they do. So during my portion of the session, I usually try to incorporate a lot of that cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a lot more directive. I usually have something planned, or I have something focused that we're wanting to try to implement that's going to help this child along their treatment plan. And then the second part of the session, that's where the power of play really gets to come into place. And this child or this teen really gets to explore their world and tell me their story and what's going on within them through the power of play. So depending on the age of the child, the emotional age of the child, I'm going to allow that play portion to be greater or, half as much, depending on what they really need and depending on how much of that regulatory network in the brain is actually in place. So it's a lot of a fluid motion, if that makes sense. And then that last part, the play therapy approaches are really qualified to facilitate and support the development of the regulatory networks. So, research suggests that play therapy is an effective mental health approach, honestly, regardless of age, gender, or the nature of the problem, and works best when a parent, family, or caregiver is actively involved in the treatment process. And I know that's a little bit of a challenge whenever we're working with foster kids because it's not always the same caretaker. Oftentimes their placements are changing or are moving. And so that's where you come in as a CASA because you are more continual in that process. So we'll touch on that here in a little bit too. But really why we need a caretaker is because kids are not known to be great historians. They don't come in telling me when they threw tantrums or when they really struggled with a peer or how they were, refused to do something at school or whatever it is. I really need input in how this child is doing in their current environment. But then also during how I said I put them into, I have my time and their time. During my time, we're usually trying to implement a lot of coping skills too. And so I will need help of a caregiver or of somebody that's actively involved in this child's life to try to get what we're doing in the counseling or the playroom to be able to translate into their other environments as well. So practically speaking, what does play therapy actually look like? How does it actually play out, so to speak? So basically we use play materials, any of them. We prefer toys without batteries because you want the child to be able to decide what that toy is going to do or what it's going to say or how it's going to behave. We use a wide range of toys that include toys to help show nurture, help show conflict, toys to demonstrate aggression, toys to be able to show anger or other big feelings that they might have. And within the umbrella of play therapy, there's kind of different branches that we can use. And so one of those is different types of materials, which would be, markers, crayons, Play-Doh, clay, paint, glitter, all of those different ways that a child can express themselves. And then also there's sand tray therapy, which I really, really love. For all kids, the younger the kid, the more likely they're just going to play in the sand. Our teenagers oftentimes will create a story of something that's happened in their sand, and it uses that symbolic play to be able to express what's really going on within them. So I'm going to share a couple pictures with you of a session that I had in the past, so you can really kind of see how this symbolism plays out whenever it comes to play therapy. So I've been given permission to share the stories of this child's play, but I'll have to be fairly vague in what happened to the child in order to continue to protect their confidentiality. So this child began therapy after someone very close to them passed away very unexpectedly and very traumatically. To add to the complexity of the trauma, the child was alone whenever this person died. And so there was nobody else around, and they had to try to figure out what to do by themselves. So needless to say, this child was processing both trauma and grief, and play therapy was a great avenue for them to be able to do that. So when a child comes into our playroom, I tell them that this is a special playroom where many kids come when they're feeling, and then I fill in the blank kind of with whatever the presenting issue is, when they're feeling sad, mad, angry, worried, or they're having a hard time, whatever it is. And then I tell them they can play with all of the toys in many of the ways that they choose. So I'll tell you the story that this kid was telling me as they played in the sand. So this is a sand tray that we have up at our office. And whenever the child came in, it was just completely filled with sand. And so they came into the playroom and immediately began building this volcano. And they were telling me how this was a really big volcano, and they just kept piling all of this sand back together. And if you go back and remember how we had just talked about trauma often being stored in the sensory portions of the brain, then you'll understand why it's so important that this child had sensory input to help them regulate as they were sharing this story. So this child builds up this really big volcano, and then goes over to where all of our different toy miniatures are, and begins getting toy miniatures out, and is very particular about the toy miniatures that they want, really taking their time. So you see we have dinosaurs, we have all sorts of army men, there was a specific number of cowboys and Indians, and they really kind of placed them all around the volcano. So after getting everything really situated just like they wanted it, the child goes on to tell me that a bomb is about to go off. And so I am following this child's play, and they put the bomb down. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, that's where they placed the bomb. So the bomb goes off, and this child tells me that none of the guys in the sand were expecting it. And then they proceed to make sure that every single item that they put in the sand was affected and was knocked down by it. So that kind of goes, it's a great example to show you that play therapy, we look for the symbolism, and we look for their symbolic play because they show us what's going on in their world through the things that they show us as well. So this child was telling me about an event that was very unexpected that happened in their life. I mean, if you think about it, it was a volcano, but the volcano didn't erupt. A bomb hit it, which was not the way that a volcano would usually make things go to pieces. But an unexpected event happened that left everything in their life feeling in shambles. Everything was affected by it, which it's true. If you've ever experienced grief in your life, there's times whenever you feel like, how do we move on from this? So this child gave a very accurate way of processing what happened in their world. We go back to that repetitive piece that's needed. This child actually did this 3 times. And on the 3rd time, they first stopped and said, I'm going to play darts, and then I'm going to do this one more time. And then they came back and they played it again. And they were really processing that event, because what we know with trauma is whenever it first happens, it feels massive and they can't really deal with it. And the more they process it, the more they deal that story, the more manageable it becomes. And so this child was helping this traumatic event that felt huge to them, was helping it feel more manageable the more times that they were sharing this story. One of the things I love about play therapy is that I told this child whenever we had about 5 minutes left, like, hey, our session is almost over. We have about 5 minutes left, because I like to give them a warning that our time for the day is coming to an end. And this child made sure to pick up and rebuild the world, making sure that nothing was left fallen over, which was significant of the healing that's taking place with them, knowing that there is hope, that things are going to continue going on, and that we are going to be able to rebuild after this event has happened. So that's an example of very healthy play that was experienced in this session. And I just felt like it did a really good job of kind of explaining like what's going on in the playroom, because the child's going to leave and tell his parents like, yeah, I play with dinosaurs. And the parents like, okay, hope it was helpful. But yes, there is more to it than just play. It's actually really powerful play. And it was more specific to what this child was needing in order to be able to process their life experiences and what had happened. So how would I know if a child that I'm advocating for, or that I'm seeing, would benefit from play therapy? Registered play therapists would tell you all children benefit from play therapy. That's the short answer. But questions I would want to ask you if you were looking for therapy for a child is to keep in mind their emotional age. So where are they at emotionally? And would play therapy be a good medium for them in that? How are they currently adjusting to their situation? Have they recently transitioned, or are they having a hard time with their current placement? Or now that they're not in school, or life has changed a lot for everybody right now, how are they adjusting right now? What have they been diagnosed with from their psychological evaluation? That gives you a little bit of intel of what they might be needing. And finally, like, is what they're doing now, is it working for them? Is the current therapy that they're in, is that being effective, or are we seeing results? I will tell you, play therapy is usually a fairly long process. Research tells us on average, kids go to play therapy from 12 to 16 sessions, which is 3 to 4 months before we really see progress in what they're doing. that the pictures that I showed you of the last kid, that kid came in ready to process. And not all kids come in that ready to process their situation. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for them to feel comfortable, for them to get a good idea of what this is going to be like. So it really varies. I mean, I would anticipate the kid from the previous slides that I showed you, those pictures, that kid probably only needs, you know, maybe two months, you know, 6 to 8 sessions of therapy. A lot of the kids that we're working with have very complex trauma, and those are going to take a lot longer because there's different various pieces that they really need to work through. So how do I find play therapy for a child? So I kind of want to make a distinction. There's registered play therapists, and then there's mental health practitioners. But all mental health practitioners, or I'm sorry, all registered play therapists are also a mental health practitioner. So I am licensed as a licensed professional counselor, but then I have a certification as a registered play therapist. So that kind of indicates that I have certification with extensive training, supervision, and education in play therapy. Basically, if you see the words registered play therapist by a provider, it means that's their wheelhouse. That's one of the areas that they've gone above and beyond to be able to study in that area. So there's only 4 registered play therapists in Abilene, myself and 3 others. However, there's several different therapists that are working on the credential. It just requires quite a bit of training and supervision. And I was lucky that a lot of mine, I got to mesh up the same ones I needed for my licensure. I also got to use for my registered play therapist certification. So just because somebody is not a registered play therapist does not mean they don't provide play therapy. So all counselors who work with children have a little bit of training in play therapy, and they can provide that as well. So there's actually, I mean, there's a lot of therapists and counselors in town who are not registered play therapists, who've worked with kids for decades and are really great at what they do and have so much experience. So if you don't necessarily have to find a registered play therapist in order to find play therapy, it just kind of gets to the point. So in finding play therapy for a child, it would be important to ask a mental health practitioner if they're working with children, ask if they provide play therapy, and then also if they take superior Medicaid. So that's what all of our foster kids are on. That's kind of the criteria that you would need if you were trying to find a counselor for your child. Usually this plays out in private practice, so all of the different private practices in town, but I know like New Horizons STAR program, there's some other avenues to be able to find play therapy as well. So what is your role in the therapeutic process? Honestly, the biggest one is probably helping find play therapy for a child. I'm hopeful that one day we'll have more counselors in Abilene working with children, but right now it can be kind of difficult to get a child in when they need the services because a lot of people have a wait list. So do your research, trying to find people, really trying to advocate. You're more than welcome to reach out to me or send me an email. Oftentimes counselors, we stay in touch. So I might know somebody who has some openings, or I might have openings myself, be able to get somebody in. But really, I mean, helping get that child established with a therapist that can work with them. So once they're established in the therapy process, really I love whenever I get to work with CASA workers. I love whenever I get your input, whenever I have communication going back and forth between them. So I see myself as a therapist coming onto this child's team, and coming onto this child's team, oftentimes you're the go-to person for all of these different people on the team. So one of the coolest sessions I had was at this intake appointment. So presence at the intake appointment, whether that's in person, over the phone. So I want your input at that intake appointment, where that's the appointment where I would be getting all the background information. We would be talking about the present concerns that we're seeing with a child, or where they're having difficulty adjusting to things, and also kind of setting what our goals are for counseling. One of the coolest intake appointments I ever had, I had the CASA worker present, I had the case manager present, and the attorney ad litem all showed up to this child's appointment, and I was like, this is the best thing ever. And everybody came prepared with their documentation that would be helpful for me, and it was just really kind of cool to get to see the system work out. So if I were working with one of your kids, I would want your communication up front about how this child's doing and what's going on. Then I would also want some updates throughout the therapy process. And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about. Kids are not good historians, and they don't usually share where they're having trouble or what's going great or what's coming up. And so, that can look like a phone call or an email, or, hey, I just wanted to let you know this happened, or I just saw so-and-so and thought that this might be helpful for you to know. Those sort of things, like that kind of communication, is super, super helpful for me as a therapist to be able to gauge where this child is at in the therapy process. And then with that, I also want communication on court hearings and dates that you would need documentation. And this is not the day before the court hearing. Oftentimes, judges want our recommendations as therapists, and that takes a little bit of effort, going through all of our notes and compiling a couple paragraphs of what we recommend for this child. So keep me up to date on court hearings and dates. I know those are often changing. Send a quick email of, hey, just letting you know, here's the next date of what we need, so that I can make sure you have what you need whenever you are going to court. Okay, so this is kind of the last portion of what I want to touch on. It seems a little bit random to immediately go into a specific disorder, but both personal and professional experience tells me that sensory processing disorder is so common with so many of our kids that are in the foster care system. The reason I wanted to touch on it now and talking about kind of mental health therapy is because sensory processing disorder often goes undetected because it mimics other disorders that would bring a child to play therapy, such as ADHD, learning disabilities, that developmental delay we talked about, other emotional imbalances that they might be experiencing. So kind of what is sensory processing disorder? I'll start there. And first, we have to remember trauma is primarily stored in the sensory networks of the brain. So it's very, very likely that a child who's experienced a form of trauma is also experiencing this inability to process their sensory stimuli effectively. So what sensory processing disorder is, we first have to distinguish that our senses and our ability to use those senses effectively are not the same thing. So we're born with our ability to touch, taste, see, hear, and balance. But our ability to actually use those, it says the skillful interpretation and use of those sensations are not the same thing. Our use of it, or our ability to use it, is shaped as we get older. And so what this looks like is, as an infant, that child is sitting there, they're smelling a mother, they're seeing a mother, they're getting that touch. That is the process of forming those senses so that they can effectively be used. So we know that early trauma of any kind can interrupt this natural developmental flow, causing these sensory deficits, which often later show up in the form of behavioral and learning difficulties. Oftentimes, our kids who are diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder have a lot of sensory needs going on, because these are the problem kids in the classroom. These are the kids who will just not do anything, or seem like they have really severe ADHD. So for obvious reasons, children of abuse and neglect are at a special risk for these deficiencies. And if left unaddressed, it just continues to increase and get worse. So I know Rebel has said she touches on this a lot, but early intervention is key, and really being able to advocate for a child in this way. So it's important to remember that just like with autism spectrum disorder, we're all probably on the spectrum to some degree. We all have different levels of it. The same is true of sensory processing disorder. It's a spectrum, and you might even see some of these within yourself, but when it becomes an issue, or when it really needs to be addressed or get treatment, is whenever a child it's interfering with their daily activities, with their relationships, with their ability to do schoolwork, that sort of thing. So oftentimes kids with sensory processing disorder will respond to sensory input with a flight, fight, or freeze response. And so it's important to try to identify when this kid is having a meltdown or misbehaving. Is there some sort of sensory input that might be setting this into effect? So different kinds of things to look for are avoiding interactions with other children, their aversion to transitions, overreacting to loud noises, other meltdowns that might be triggered by that that. And this is the other document that Rebel sent in the chat box that kind of compiles all of this information too. So you can look back on it if you think you might be working with a child that would also need treatment for sensory processing disorder. So within the umbrella of sensory processing disorder, there's kind of 3 different branches: that's sensory modulation problems, sensory discrimination problems, and sensory-based motor problems. So within the sensory modulation problems, there's the over-responsive, under-responsive, and sensory-seeking child. So the child who is over-responsive to senses reacts with fight or flight to unexpected touch, intense light, getting dirty, certain textures on clothes. These are often the kids who can't stand the tag on their jacket or the seam on their socks, or will only wear certain kinds of pants because of how they feel, just really hypersensitive to the ways that things sound. These are the kids in the classroom who are often keeping their hands over their ears, or whenever they go to the gym, they might refuse to want to go in the gym because it's the sensory overload. They're really sensitive to it. The under-responsive child is often the opposite. They're completely unaware of sensory input, and they usually have food on their face. Their hair is oftentimes in their face and they don't really notice it. It might be cold outside and they're not wearing a jacket. There's lots of different ways that we see this show up. And then the sensory seeking child, this is the child that wallows in mud, is chewing on their hair, and they're really seeking the sensory things. At school, this looks like the kid who's always touching the wall down the hallway, or always jumping up and down, getting that sensory impact. These are the kids, whenever they come into my office, they have to touch every single little thing on my desk before they can move on or be able to focus. So those are different ways we see the sensory modulation problems show up. Just sensory discrimination problems. This is a child cannot tell where in their body that they've been touched. They can't feel themselves falling, and they appear clumsy. They're not able to gauge the appropriate amount of force that a task would take, like grabbing a pencil or a toy. They oftentimes can't tell the difference between certain types of smell, such as the vinegar, lemon, cookies baking. They have a difficult time discriminating between different senses. And then the final part of that is the sensory-based motor problems. So this child usually is either super tense or kind of has loose and floppy muscle tone. They lose balance easily, they trip on air, they have difficulty integrating both sides of their body, like jumping jacks are nearly impossible for them. I know we talked a little bit about Zoe, my sister. For the longest time, she would run and swing one of her arms in a circle. That was a sensory-based motor problem. Through different forms of treatment, she no longer does that. But that was one of the ways that we would practically see it show up in her. So those are kind of ways that you might see some sensory processing disorder show up for a child. The reason that I really wanted to touch on it is actually, like, in my training, I have not had any training on sensory processing disorder. It's not part of our DSM that we diagnose from as clinicians. And like it's out there, like people do know about it, but because it masks itself like ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, so many other things, I really felt like it would be important to touch on and make you aware of it, because a child kind of needs to go above and beyond to get treatment. And really they have to have this integration of the senses if anything else is going to be as effective, if that makes sense. So how do you get treatment for sensory processing disorder? In addition to play therapy, it's really important that these children get in with an occupational therapist who really specializes in sensory integration. So it's like the whole focus of therapy needs to be on sensory input. And this occupational therapist would be giving things to the caretaking family that would also all be focused on sensory input and really helping integrate that sensory portion of the brain. Because you kind of think of it as like short wired. It's not connecting all the way. That part of the brain's not all the way online like it needs to be. And what we know about the brain is it's plastic and there's healing. We just have to have the right forms of therapy in place. So it's my belief every play therapist needs a good OT in their back pocket to be able to refer to, because it's super common. And we want to make sure that these kids are getting the help that they need. So that's kind of the end of it. Here's the link for those resources also, if you needed to screenshot it. But these are the same ones that Rebel attached in the PDF file that I sent over to her too. But That's kind of it. That's all I have for you. I hope that there's some questions or something that I can try to answer.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's wonderful. It's very informative. So you guys, if you have not posted, oh, and she's going to quit sharing and we'll go back to this.
Okay.
If you've not posted your questions, please take a minute to do that. The first one I see on there is, it looks like it's from Catherine. How is the emotional age determined, Rebecca?
Not not super, what am I trying to say? From like an assessment, there is no assessment to really kind of gauge their emotional age. This would be more how their interactions are with peers, with siblings that they might be with. Do they seem to be responding to things age appropriately, or do they like, is it out of character for what it should be? You know, is a 10-year-old flailing themselves on the floor whenever they're not getting their way? That's typically not age appropriate for it. So it would be more based on observation or from communication that you're getting from a caretaker.
And then that follows up, Anita's question follows up, can a 12-and-a-half-year-old participate in play therapy? And answer that, and then I'll tell them about what I contacted you about.
Yeah, yes, they can. Really, anybody that's interested in play therapy could participate in it. That sand tray therapy that I told you about, I do that actually with a lot with adults, because it taps into a different portion of the brain that you can't always tap into linguistically. And so I know I've even created sand trays that I am surprised at myself what I put in there, and I didn't realize the connection whenever I did it. So yes, a 12-and-a-half-year-old could definitely participate in play therapy. Oftentimes, depending on their cool meter, they might not be super interested in going into the playroom because they might perceive it as being babyish. But that's where we could incorporate other things. Like I have a sand tray in my office where it's like we could be talking and then have them do some other types of play in traditional talk therapy as well. So, but I also have 13 and 14-year-olds who enjoy going into the playroom. And so it really kind of depends. I don't know. I also have some 13 and 14-year-olds who carry around baby dolls, and like their emotional age is still behind. And so it really kind of depends on the child and their interest and ability to want to do that.
So if someone has a question about the therapy that their child's receiving, so for example, I received a new case in January, and it's a 14-year-old girl, and she's just not responding to the therapy. And this is not her first time in CPS. She's actually, a lot of y'all are familiar with RAPR, where, you know, the parents can't control their children, so they go to CPS for help. So it's a joint managing conservatorship between the parent and the department. But this is her second time in care, and she's extremely violent. She will have major outbursts. And talking traditional therapy is not getting anywhere for her. So what should we be looking for so that we feel like we have evidence to support that decision to seek out a different type of therapy? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think kind of with the case that we had talked about with yours, what you had expressed to me was this child was like frustrated with the therapy and was saying like, this isn't working, or that doesn't make sense, or why am I still doing this or that or the other? And so the child was specifically expressing that like, this isn't helpful for me, or I'm not getting anywhere with this. And it's kind of, I mean, I would listen to that child, is like, clearly they feel like they would click with something else. And so we want to try to find something else for them. My questions for you, Rebel, were, are they using any sort of play at all? Because this child that might need to be tapping into those other portions of their brain. I had mentioned like that sand tray therapy sounds like it could be really helpful for this child to help her process what she's experiencing and really what steps she wants to take in moving forward. And to your knowledge, they weren't necessarily doing that. It was more goal focused. What are the steps I take to get to that goal, which sounds good in the moment, but doesn't always play out super well or effectively.
So as advocates, what are some of the things that we should be looking for when we get these progress reports from our therapist? How would we know if it's being successful, or if maybe we need to look at other options?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Sorry. As advocates, when we are evaluating our cases and we're monitoring the therapy, what are some indicators that we might look for to know if therapy is being successful or not?
Yeah. I would say if we're seeing progress, but that's not necessarily always the case. I would say if that's with progress, I always tell people in therapy, it's not just things get better, 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 better. Yay, we're where we want to be. It's this up and down roller coaster of, you know, this week was really great. Last week they fell back into whatever these patterns were. We're seeing progress. And so you really kind of have to give it some time. And after maybe a couple months, be able to look back, what were the treatment goals, or what was our goal of therapy in this, and have we made steps in the bigger picture to get to that point? So I'm trying to think of an example of what that would look like specifically, but like with the case that I showed you, so this child that was processing both the grief and the trauma, the big picture of that is for them to get to a place where that trauma feels manageable and they're no longer as reactive to it. So that child is also, you know, throwing fits and getting angry and throwing things all over their room. So practically speaking, have those behaviors diminished over some time? Are they now able to verbalize the feelings that they might be having? And that child was very obsessive about telling this story over and over. How does that kind of decrease them? They no longer have the need to be able to have to share those things repetitively. Does that answer your question?
That's
kind of the bigger picture. You can't always just look at it this week, last week, sometimes even this month, last month. It's more of like take a step back, try to see the bigger picture, where have we made progress, and get input from other people in that child's life, because sometimes they have made progress at school, but at home they're still fighting the same battles.
Good. Okay, so Megan has a question that you said that when you're going to give, that you need notice before you would give any input on a hearing. How much time would you need to get a report ready for a hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think a week would be generous. If you know you have something coming up, try to give at least a week's worth of a notice, because that way we can kind of work it into our schedule. I know oftentimes dates change though, and sometimes it might be a little bit out of your control, but generally speaking, I think most therapists would be happy with a week.
Okay, good. Okay, guys, what other questions do you have for Rebecca? Anything? Rob Davidson, I'm a little jealous. You're outside and it looks beautiful. Okay, do you have any other questions? Rebecca, anything else you want to add?
No, I hope that everybody got something from this at least.
Well, it's very informative, very helpful. Rebecca will be very available. I am recording this, so if anyone needs to go back and look at it again, then we'll have it available. Don't forget to print out the documents. But before we go, I do have 3 door prizes. And so if Rebecca would pick a number between 1 and 39.
Let's go with 33.
33 is Kathy Arno. Kathy, I hope you're still on here. If you are, if you'll shoot me a little message in the comment thing, you get a $5 gift card to Chick-fil-A.
Hey, thanks. Thanks. I'm on. I listened to the whole thing. It was wonderful. And thank you for the gift card.
You're very welcome. If you'll pick another one, Rebecca.
Let's go with 11.
11. Opal, are you on here, Opal? I didn't see her earlier, so I'm not sure if she logged in or not.
Okay, pick another number. 14.
14. Dana Deckman, are you on here? Yep, I see her. This is yours, and I'll have your name on it. Okay, and then one more, please.
28.
28. Rob Harley, you got it. Rob Davidson, the third one's for you. So, okay, guys, well, we are at our 1 hour mark. So if you have more questions, feel free to go ahead and put them in there. If not, you are done. Please pass along your thanks and appreciation to Rebecca. Good job, Becca. You handled it well.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me come on and share what I do.
Thank you, guys. And y'all can just log out whenever you're ready to go. And I'm going to leave the meeting open for a minute in case you have questions. Bye. It's fun seeing people go out one at a time. Okay, so those that are still on, do you have any questions? And you can unmute yourself if you'd like to talk to Rebecca.
Or input from your own experiences, Mom.
Yeah, give feedback.
I don't know where to find the documents.
Okay, they were at the very top of the chat box. Are they not showing up again?
Oh, maybe if I go up, no, I'm not finding them.
That's really weird. Let me just try them one more time here. It's really bizarre how it's not. And now it's not giving me the opportunity to add them. Huh. Let me see here. I can email them out to everybody. I don't know if it's not letting me. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I did this way. Oh, here we go. Let me share it one more time.
Maybe it only sends to the people that are currently on.
I guess.
You send it.
I guess that's a good lesson. I can't add them in advance. So
Maybe
people have to be logged on at the time. Okay, so anyone else? Do y'all have any other questions before she goes? Jeanette, hi.
This isn't a question, but this morning, Back-to-Back Ministries released a sensory processing home checklist guide. So I'll send that to you guys. It just has a whole bunch of questions to self-screen at home. And it's very, very, very comprehensive, but literally came out about 10 this morning. So I'll send that.
I'll attach that when I send these.
It's really good. You know, when I teach art and trauma, I always talk about the sensory, how traumas are processed through the senses and they have to be released through the senses as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know there's not very many art therapists. Again, like what you're doing, it's a pretty intense education plan to go through. So I'm glad that you are here with play therapy. And just personally, play therapy really saved my son and our family's life when he was between the ages of 2 and 5.
Really?
We went through some really bad trauma. And he had a play therapist here in Abilene. And I don't know if she's one of the, but it was Sherry Fleming. And she just will always be so indebted to her for what she did for Donald and for us. I mean, we were like deer in the headlight.
Right. Yeah.
I'm so grateful you went for the more.
Sometime I want you to share about art therapy and how we can use that. So we need to get that set up, and you could even do us a little how we could do it, even though we're not artists, maybe how we
Absolutely. Sure.
I'll get with you on that. That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, art is such an easy, it opens a door for so much communication, just like play therapy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just start creating and you're just kind of sitting there, and it's the same like baking in the kitchen with kids. You know, you're in the kitchen, you're baking, and just conversations will start happening as they're occupied with other things. But that art therapy is, and the pediatrician that she went over to, I think it was maybe Uganda or Darfur. It was Darfur in Africa to help with the civil war atrocities that had happened. And she just grabbed a thing of crayons as she was packing her bag. And it turned out that the kids started drawing pictures, and they started drawing pictures of the atrocities they had been through and seen. And those pictures were actually used in court to, I don't know what the word is, prosecute.
Testimony or
right,
something.
right.
the rebels that went through. And you know, she really had no idea of art therapy or anything like that. It just happened, and that's when they realized, wow, maybe there's more that can be uncovered through the subconscious and the senses, which is what I think play therapy does.
I agree.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say Trina just came in. Trina, we're at the end of the meeting, and so most people have already logged out, but I did record it. And so I'll email you and we'll share on how you can watch the recording. So, all right, guys, anything else?
Well, I have a quick question for Teresa. You know, you had posted that your story.
Yes.
And so I would love, if you're still willing to have it be posted on Facebook or what, you know, I would love to share that, because now we're in April and Child Abuse Awareness Month.
It's actually on my news feed, but I'll send the link to you.
I could probably go back and find it for the news feed too.
Sure.
But I just thank you for being willing to do that.
Thank you. And Rebecca, I'm sure you probably suggest this for adults, but I do a lot of coloring now.
Yeah.
I know through a lot of my therapy, because I didn't do any therapy as a child. I sure wish I would have, but that has been like the biggest thing for me and now I love finding the adult coloring books with all the scripture in it. And I actually color them and paste them in my closet or somewhere where I can see them. So, I mean,
yes, I'll need to send you a link. Yeah, I have a bunch of adult ones saved that I have printed off in my office.
I should have asked that.
Do that too.
Yeah, I should have asked that. Maybe we can pass that link along to the advocates as well.
Okay.
I know for me, whenever we go on a trip or I'm on an airplane, I either read or I color.
Mm-hmm.
And that has just been such a neat thing. Somebody told me to do that, and I was like, I'm not really a colorer. I don't feel like I'm an artsy person, but
yeah. Well, it incorporates that repetitive movement too, and it's the sensory input, and it is cathartic, even in kind of giving you some control too over a lot of what we're experiencing. We feel out of control.
Yeah.
So,
and then we can memorize scripture and then, you know, hang it up. I know, like when Lisa Walker had surgery, I took her over a coloring book and a thing of color pencils, and she's like, this is awesome.
yeah, it's so great.
All right, guys. Well, unless there's anything else, we're going to wrap it up so Rebecca can get home to her little toddler. You did a great job.
You did a great job. That was awesome. I learned a lot. Thank you.
So proud of you, Rebecca, and all you've accomplished and the blessing that you are to our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you for letting me share.
All right.
All right. Bye, everyone.
See you later. Bye, Rebel.
Bye.